Ellie, that's a beautiful name.
Do you know your mom's name?
Ava. She said it keeps us safe.
Minneapolis is a whiteout. Adrian Wolf, a lonely tech CEO, steps out of a gala and checks his cold map app. A blue anomaly blinks by a shuttered bus stop. In a shaking cardboard shelter, a little girl clutches a dented brass whistle engraved AWW North Star. She whispers, "My mom is Ava." Adrian freezes. Ava is his estranged sister. Will the whistle lead him back to family before the storm closes in? Warm air from the Nicolette Ballroom spilled into a night that did not care. Wind drove snow sideways across the plaza. Adrian Wolf paused under the awning, thanked the chauffeur who offered the town car, and stepped into the white as if choosing honesty over comfort. Inside, they had toasted North Star's winter intelligence. Crystal flutes, a keynote that hit every metric, a plaque that caught light like ice. He had smiled for photos, accepted congratulations from partners who loved the polish as much as the product, and felt like a window everyone looked through, but no one entered. He set the untouched champagne on a tray and slipped away. Out here, the sky had teeth. Cold slipped down his collar, and the parka swallowed the line of his Italian suit. His watch ticked steady under the cuff, a metronome for a life that never paused. Bored texts buzzed. He cleared them and opened the app that had charmed the room. North Star's map bloomed in blues and grays. Shelter lights glowed like small hearths. Radar snow scrolled, a quiet storm inside his hand. A valet jogged up with a scarf. "Sir, the skyways are warmer." He took the scarf and kept walking. The snow squeaked under his boots, brittle as chalk. Across the avenue, a bus shelter wore a skin of frost. The city felt familiar and foreign at once, both stage and confession booth. He had spoken about resilience from a mahogany podium, but memory did not obey a slide. It arrived when the wind turned. Glacier light on metal, a red knit cap, a girl laughing because every echo in the valley sounded like the word go. Ava loved winter because it made everything honest. No shortcuts, no pretending. They had not spoken in years. Not one fight, but 100 small ones, calcified by pride. Wrong words at a hospital door. Silence after the funeral. A birthday text that read like a receipt. Work had been easier to hold than grief. Work did not ask him to change. The wind cut across Hennepin. A plow groaned somewhere up the street. He crossed on a stale signal and stopped beneath the shelter. His breath fogged the glass. On the bench, a drift had formed like a frozen wave. Someone had traced a smiley face and wiped it away. He toggled the app to field mode. The core showed steady warmth. Outward, the colors cooled and fractured, pockets of risk opening like cracks on a lake. He listened. Minneapolis at 0 sounded like a held breath. A train horn carried across the river. A thin paper cup rolled, skittered, and lodged against the frame. A security guard from the gala approached, cheeks red. "Sir, the car is ready." "I am fine," he said. The guard nodded and retreated, small against the white. Adrian felt the pull to leave. He could go home, run a systems check, sleep for 3 hours, and call it care. He stayed. He had learned the city by walking its weather, a habit that made his team nervous and his heart honest. He slid a hand into his pocket and found a coin he did not remember pocketing. He thought of the photo in his living room. 2 kids in the same snow, a brass whistle bright in the sun. He had bought it for Ava at a gas station on the way to Glacier. "If you are lost, sound this and I will find you." His phone vibrated, not a text, but the app's ambient alert. The map shifted. A blue, cold spot pulsed at the far edge of the block, where wind tunneled between a shuttered newsstand and the back of the shelter. The pulse held and darkened, as if the air itself had decided to call for help. Snow hissed against the glass like sand. Adrian lifted his eyes to the snow and stepped toward it. The cold grew sharper as Adrian crossed the street. Every exhale turned to vapor that drifted upward and vanished into the blizzard. The North Star app kept pulsing in his gloved hand, an anomaly, a place too cold even for the night. He rounded the corner of the bus shelter and nearly slipped on the black ice that glazed the sidewalk. The wind screamed through the alley like a live thing. Snow swirled between the glass panels, piling into a corner where an old cardboard box had been pressed into the shape of a lean-to. It shuddered with each gust. For a moment he thought it was trash, until a sound stopped him cold. A faint cough, then another, small, rhythmic, terrified. Adrian crouched, his breath quickening. "Hey!" he called softly, voice carried by the wind. "Is someone there?" No answer, only the crackle of paper and the whistle of air through cardboard seams. He slid closer and lifted one edge. Inside, he saw a small figure curled tight beneath an old coat. Snow had seeped through the edges, leaving white dust on tiny boots. A little girl, maybe 4. Her cheeks were raw, lips cracked, eyelashes frosted with ice. She stirred at the light, clutching a small backpack against her chest like armor. "It's okay," he murmured. "I won't hurt you." Her eyes opened, gray-blue, clouded with exhaustion. "It's not a bed," she whispered, voice hoarse, "but the cardboard keeps the wind out." The words cut through him. Adrian's throat tightened. "You're right," he said softly. "It does, but it's too cold tonight. You'll freeze out here." She blinked at him, half-conscious. The child's hair stuck out in wild curls beneath a knitted cap. Round her neck hung something metallic, a small brass whistle, dented and dull with age. His pulse spiked. He knew that whistle. The same engraving. AWW, North Star. The same gift he had given his younger sister Ava when they were teenagers hiking Glacier Peak. He had told her jokingly, "Blow it if you ever need me." She'd laughed, tucked it away, and years later, after their falling out, she'd still worn it in every photo. Adrian's breath fogged the brass surface. Where did you get this?" he asked, voice cracking. The girl blinked slowly. "Mom's," she mumbled. "She said it keeps us safe." He swallowed hard, the world narrowing to her small face. "What's your name?" "Ellie," she murmured. "Ellie," he repeated gently. "That's a beautiful name. Do you know your mom's name?" "Ava," she said, barely above a whisper. Then her eyes fluttered closed. The name hit him like a physical blow. Ava, his sister, the one he hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. The last message she'd ever sent him. "Don't worry about me, big brother. I'll figure it out." He hadn't replied. He'd told himself she needed space. Now a 4-year-old in a snowstorm was saying her name. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the emergency thermal pack he always carried, a prototype from North Star's Heat Smart program. He cracked it open and slid it into the cardboard lean-to, watching the faint glow spread warmth toward the child. He wrapped his parka around her tiny frame. "You're safe, Ellie," he whispered. "I've got you." Her small hand twitched, still gripping the whistle. He gently pried it from her fingers, examined the worn engraving again, and slipped it into his pocket for safekeeping. A snowplow rumbled somewhere in the distance, muffled by wind. Adrian scooped her up, careful to shield her face. She was so light, like lifting snow itself. He started toward his SUV, the app still blinking in his pocket, a digital pulse beside the real one, faintly beating against his chest. Inside the car, the heat roared to life. He wrapped her in an emergency blanket, rubbing her hands gently to bring color back. She stirred, blinking at the dashboard lights. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "To get you warm," he said. "Then we'll figure everything else out." Outside, the snow thickened, erasing the world behind him. He didn't look back. Tonight, for the first time in years, Adrian Wolfe was following something more powerful than data. He was following instinct, love, and a desperate hope that his sister's story wasn't over yet. At the emergency clinic downtown, the automatic doors hissed open, spilling light and heat into the frozen night. Adrian strode in, cradling Ellie in his arms. Her small body trembled under the silver blanket. The triage nurse took one look and waved him past the desk. "She's hypothermic," Adrian said, voice tight. "I found her outside, in a bus shelter." "Room 3!" the nurse barked. Two attendants rushed over, lifting Ellie gently onto a gurney. Adrian stood back as they swarmed around her. Oxygen mask, warm IV fluids, gentle hands checking her pulse. He watched her eyelids flutter as warmth crept back into her cheeks. The doctor, a calm woman in navy scrubs, turned to him. "You did the right thing bringing her in. She's lucky you found her when you did. Another hour, and her core temperature would have dropped below survival range." He nodded, barely breathing. "She said her mother's name is Ava Wolf," he said carefully, "and she had this." He held up the brass whistle, its engraved letters catching the fluorescent light. The doctor frowned. "You said Wolf?" "Yes." His voice cracked. "She's my sister." The doctor blinked, connecting the dots. "You're Adrian Wolf, North Star Labs." He gave a small nod. "But right now, I'm just her brother." Ellie stirred on the bed, whispering something through chapped lips. Adrian leaned closer. "She said, 'Find North Star,'" the nurse repeated softly, glancing at him. "That's all she kept saying." His chest ached. "She told her daughter to find my company." The nurse held up a folded paper tag they'd pulled from Ellie's backpack, a visitor wristband with North Star's logo and a printed emergency line number. Adrian's breath hitched. That was the hotline reserved for staff families during crises. Ava had known exactly where to send her child. "Do you have any contact info for the mother?" the doctor asked. "Not yet," he said, rubbing his temple, "but I will." He stepped out into the hallway, pulled out his phone, and dialed his head of security. "Ryan, it's me. I need you to pull every personnel file from the past 6 months, contract workers, warehouse staff, off-site laborers. Look for anyone with the name Ava, or aliases close to it. She might have used a different surname." Ryan's voice came through steady but confused. "Got it. You think she's been working in one of the facilities?" "I don't think," Adrian said grimly. "I know." He hung up and immediately called a private investigator he trusted, a former journalist named Leah Torres. She answered on the second ring. "Adrian, it's after midnight," she said. "You okay?" "No," he said quietly. "My sister's missing. I just found her daughter on the street." Leah was silent for a moment. "Tell me everything." As he recounted what happened, the story sounded unreal even to his own ears. The thermal anomaly, the cardboard shelter, the whistle. "She worked somewhere cold," he finished. "Ellie mentioned something about big freezers and loud doors. A week ago, there was some kind of drill. I think it was a cover-up." Leah swore softly. "I've heard whispers about those cold storage places outside the city. Illegal night shifts, safety violations, immigrant workers locked in during storms so quotas don't slip. I'll start there." "Find her," Adrian said. "I don't care what it costs." Back in the room, Ellie was sitting up with a cup of cocoa between her hands. The nurse smiled. "She's a fighter." Adrian sat beside her bed, lowering his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Warm," she said, eyes heavy but calmer now. "Mom said to find you if she didn't come back." He felt his throat close. "She told you that?" Ellie nodded, fingers tracing the blanket's edge. She said, "North Star always knows where warmth is." He swallowed the lump in his chest. "Your mom is brave. Do you remember where she was working?" Ellie frowned, thinking hard. "A big place. Smelled like metal. Men yelled. Mom said it was called cold. Something." She rubbed her nose. "She said the boss locked the door when it snowed." Adrian froze. He knew that description. One of North Star's subcontractors, Cold Core Logistics, notorious for cutting corners. He'd defended them once in a shareholder call, citing efficiency in extreme conditions. Now that name burned like frostbite. He brushed Ellie's hair gently. You did so good, sweetheart. You're safe now. Her eyes drifted closed again. Adrian sat there long after she slept, the hum of medical machines filling the silence. Snow hammered the windows like a relentless heartbeat. He looked at the whistle in his hand and whispered, "Ava, what happened to you?" The guilt pressed down heavier than the storm outside. "Find her," he murmured again, this time to himself. And, for the first time in years, Adrian Wolfe, the man who built an empire on data and precision, let his heart lead where algorithms never could. By morning, Minneapolis was sealed beneath another foot of snow. The streets gleamed white under a dull gray sky, and every sound seemed muffled by cold. Adrian hadn't slept. He sat in the hospital waiting room with a lukewarm cup of coffee, eyes fixed on the brass whistle in his palm. The engraving caught faint light. AWW, North Star. He remembered giving it to Ava when she was 17. They'd hiked Glacier Peak together, her first real climb. She'd tripped near a frozen ridge, laughed, and said, "If I get lost, blow this thing and find me." Now the whistle had found its way back to him, but Ava was the one lost. His phone buzzed. It was Leah, the investigator. "You were right," she said without greeting. "I cross-checked local labor reports with North Star's contractor lists. Ava Wolfe doesn't appear anywhere, but an Anna White started working at Cold Core Logistics 8 months ago. Fake name, fake address, cash pay." Adrian straightened. Cold Core, she mentioned that. "There's more," Leah continued. 3 days ago, Cold Core filed an internal incident report, classified as a safety drill gone wrong. Workers trapped during a freezer lockout. 2 injuries, 1 missing. OSHA never got the paperwork. Looks like someone buried it. A tremor ran through him. "That's her," he said quietly. "Ava's the missing one." Leah's tone hardened. "I'll dig deeper, but Adrian, if this is tied to one of your vendors, it's going to explode. You ready for that?" He looked through the glass at the child asleep down the hall. "If it leads to my sister, I don't care who it burns." When he hung up, his security chief, Ryan, arrived. Tall, steady, military posture softened by concern. "I pulled the warehouse logs you asked for. Ava, or Anna, clocked out on Thursday at 11:42 p.m. Cameras go dark at midnight. Power failure, supposedly. After that, nothing." "Nothing?" Ryan shook his head. "Except one emergency call from that district to North Star's anonymous hotline. The line disconnected before anyone spoke." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Trace it." "Already on it." He walked back to Ellie's room. She was sitting up now, bundled in a hospital sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. She looked small, but alert, spooning oatmeal from a plastic cup. Her eyes brightened when she saw him. "You came back," she said, almost surprised. "I promised I would," he replied, pulling up a chair. "How's breakfast?" "It's warm," she said with a shy smile. "Better than the shelter." Then her expression dimmed. "Mom said warm things don't last long in winter." He hesitated. "Sometimes they last longer than we think," he said softly. "Your mom, she used to say that to me when we were kids." Ellie tilted her head. "You knew her when she was little?" He nodded. "She's my little sister." The girl's eyes widened. "Then you're my uncle," he said gently, his voice catching. "Yes, I'm your Uncle Adrian." For a moment the title hung between them, fragile, miraculous. Then Ellie smiled, small but real. "Mom said you build warm maps," she whispered. She said, "If you ever get cold, find North Star." His throat closed. "She told you that?" Ellie nodded and reached for her backpack. Inside was a folded wristband tag, the same kind used for visitors at North Star Labs. Printed across the back, faint but legible, was the company's emergency hotline number. "She kept it in here," Ellie said. "She said it would help me find you if she couldn't." Adrian took the band with trembling hands. Ava hadn't just thought of him. She had trusted him, even after all those years of silence. He leaned forward, steadying his voice. Ellie, do you remember anything else about where she worked? Anything that might help me find her? Ellie frowned in concentration. It was loud, cold, like being inside a freezer. She said if people complained, the boss said they could leave, but he locked the doors anyway. Adrian's stomach turned. He'd heard whispers of labor violations, but nothing like this. He had defended those companies, cited data audits, believed the clean reports they fed him. I'm going to find your mom, he said, his voice low and certain. And until I do, you're safe with me. Ellie's small hand slipped into his. Promise? I promise. He stood, stepped into the hallway and called Leah again. Run every connection between Cold Core and North Star's supply chain. I want names, permits, leases, everything. Adrian, this could drag your own company into it, she warned. Then it drags me, he said. But no one else's family freezes in that place again. As he hung up, his phone buzzed with a new message from Ryan, a blurry screenshot from a security cam, a faint figure in a parka carrying a clipboard, walking down a corridor lined with frost-rimmed doors. The timestamp read 11:39 p.m. The face was indistinct, but the brass whistle glinted on her chest. Ava. Adrian exhaled shakily, gripping the phone. Hold on, little sister, he whispered. I'm coming. He didn't yet know how deep the trail went, but he knew one thing. The warmth he'd spent his life mapping was nothing compared to the fire now driving him forward. Snow lashed the city in sheets that evening, like torn silk under a bruised sky. The clinic had discharged Ellie with strict orders: warm fluids, rest, and no exposure to the cold. Adrian had her wrapped in layers of North Star-branded fleece blankets, sleeping in his back seat as he drove through blinding flurries toward downtown. He'd promised her he would find Ava, and he meant it. Inside the sleek hush of his SUV, the dashboard glowed blue, North Star's live thermal interface pulsing like a heartbeat. Tiny heat signatures crawled across the map. Delivery vans, street crews, shelter beacons. But the industrial zone at the city's edge, the one labeled Cold Core Logistics, was a void. A dead patch of blue, no registered warmth. He hit the speaker button. Ryan, talk to me. The security chief's voice came through, clipped. We traced the emergency call to a cellular node near Cold Core's South Annex. The line disconnected, but signal metadata confirms it came from inside their freezer wing. So someone tried to reach out, Adrian said. Yes, and based on the timestamp, it was made within minutes of Ava's last badge scan. Adrian's grip tightened on the wheel. That was her. Possibly, Ryan said carefully, but there's something else. Cold Core's regional manager shut down all remote cameras that night. They're claiming a power failure due to the blizzard. But the logs don't match up. They were manually disabled. Adrian exhaled slowly, anger pushing against the inside of his ribs. Cover up. Looks that way. He parked outside North Star's headquarters, an angular glass fortress rimmed in frost, and lifted Ellie gently from the back seat. She stirred, mumbling. Uncle Adrian? He smiled faintly. You can call me just Adrian if you want. Her small fingers clutched his sleeve. No. Mom said uncles keep promises. He swallowed hard. Then Uncle Adrian it is. The night security staff stared in confusion as their CEO carried a bundled child through the marble lobby. He nodded once, no explanations, and took the elevator straight to the top floor. His penthouse office overlooked the Mississippi River, now a frozen mirror reflecting the city's dim light. He sat Ellie on the leather couch near the fireplace, turned the smart controls to radiant heat, and slipped into his private lab. The lab hummed with quiet energy. Wall-length screens filled with city schematics, heat maps, and live satellite feeds. North Star's AI core, Aurora, waited for commands, its interface glowing like a single pale star. Run query, he said. Cross-reference cold core logistics with North Star's active supply chain for temperature anomalies last 96 hours. Aurora's synthesized voice responded, calm and neutral. Analyzing. 57 anomalies detected. 12 marked unresolved. 1 classified as severe cold gradient. Below survival threshold. Coordinates: Cold Core South Annex. Overlay last known human activity, he said. The map flickered. A cluster of faint red dots appeared. Workers moving through corridors. Then, at midnight, movement stopped. The dots faded one by one until only 3 remained. Then silence. Adrian stared at the screen, his reflection fractured across the glass. 3 people alive, he whispered. Maybe. From the next room, a small voice called, "Adrian?" He turned. Ellie stood in the doorway, hair tousled, wrapped in a blanket that trailed behind her like a cape. "Hey," he said softly. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head. "It's too quiet." He crouched, meeting her eyes. "You're safe here, I promise." She studied him for a long moment, then said, "Mom said storms don't last forever." He smiled faintly. She was right. Her eyes drifted to the wall of screens. "Is that your warm map?" He nodded. "It shows me where people need help." She pointed to the dark zone at the map's edge. "Then why is that part blue?" Adrian followed her finger. "The South Annex, the void of Cold Core." "Because that's where the warmth ran out," he said quietly. Ellie frowned. "Then you have to go make it warm again." Her words pierced deeper than any data report ever had. He looked back at the screen, then at her small, determined face. "Yes," he said finally. "I do." He tucked her back onto the couch, added another blanket, and stood for a long time at the window. Below, the city glimmered. Towers, bridges, streets pulsing with artificial warmth. But beyond that, a shadow waited. He picked up his phone and called Leah. "I'm going there," he said. She didn't even argue. "I'll meet you with my team." As he hung up, his gaze fell to the brass whistle lying on the desk. He ran his thumb over the dented metal and slipped it into his coat pocket. The last thing Ava had touched. The last thing that connected them. By dawn, he would follow it straight into the heart of the storm. The next morning broke without color, just endless gray sky over white streets, wind gnawing at the edges of every building. Adrian stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, coffee cooling in his hand. The city below was moving again. Plows scraping intersections, commuters trudging, lights flickering through the haze. Somewhere out there, his sister might still be alive. Ellie was still asleep on the couch, curled under the blankets with a stuffed fox one of the nurses had given her. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, then set a note beside her cup of cocoa. "Back soon. Promise." He checked his watch. Bare wrist, he'd left it on the desk, and slid the brass whistle into his coat pocket instead. Downstairs, Leah Torres waited beside a frost-dusted SUV. She looked as if she hadn't slept either. Knit cap pulled low, scarf frayed, eyes alert. "You sure you want to do this yourself?" she asked. Adrian nodded. "If my sister's behind those walls, I won't learn it from a report." They drove in silence for miles. The city gave way to industrial sprawl. Low warehouses, wind turbines creaking against the frozen air, snowdrifts burying every sign. Leah flipped through the file on her lap. Cold Core's license expired 2 months ago. They're running under an unregistered subcontractor now, Arctic Chain Holdings. Same executives, different shell company. He shook his head slowly. They were partners in North Star's cold storage initiative. We funded their temperature sensors. Leah gave a dry laugh. Guess they used the money to build locks instead. By the time they reached the South Annex, the road ended in a wall of ice-stained chain link. The building rose beyond it, massive and windowless, with vents puffing steam like the breath of a sleeping beast. Leah pulled up the drone feed on her tablet. Infrared's nearly flat. Internal temp, -15 Celsius. No official power draw since the night of the storm. Yet, someone cut the cameras, Adrian murmured. They slipped through a side gate, snow crunching beneath their boots. Adrian keyed his phone into field mode. North Star's thermal overlay came alive in his glasses, a patchwork of fading blue. Every now and then, a flicker of orange hinted at trapped residual heat. The main door was sealed with a digital pad. Leah crouched, worked her tools, and in 30 seconds, the latch clicked. A blast of frozen air hit them like a wall. Inside was darkness and the hum of distant machinery. Frost clung to every surface, pipes rimed white, floor slick as glass. Adrian's breath fogged instantly. He scanned the hall, rows of steel doors each labeled in peeling paint. C01, C02, C03. This place looks abandoned, Leah whispered. He moved toward the nearest control panel, brushing away frost. The power indicator blinked faintly. Manual override engaged. Someone had locked it from the inside. He toggled the system to restore, and overhead lights flickered weakly to life. The corridor glowed pale blue, revealing scattered gloves, a broken clipboard, and, he stopped, faint footprints frozen into the ice. Small, adult-sized, leading deeper down the hall. Ava. "Someone's been here," he said. They followed the trail to a heavy freezer door sealed with an emergency wheel. The gauge beside it read -32. Leah pointed to the edge where the frost thinned. "Look." On the metal was a smear, faint but visible. Someone had scrawled 3 letters through the frost with a fingertip. AWW. Adrian's stomach dropped. "That's her." Leah pulled a handheld radio from her bag. "We need to call this in. We might have live victims." He didn't wait. He gripped the wheel with both hands and turned. It fought him at first, then gave way with a screech. Cold vapor spilled out like smoke. The stench of refrigerant and stale air hit them as the door creaked open. Inside, a narrow corridor of stacked crates and hanging carcasses, frozen meat, a grotesque maze of steel hooks and frost. He stepped forward, calling out, "Ava! Ava Wolf! It's Adrian!" His voice echoed and died. A faint sound answered, a muffled clang, like metal on metal. Leah's eyes widened. "Down there!" They hurried toward the noise, past crates and frost-covered pallets. At the end of the aisle was a small maintenance room, its inner door padlocked. Through the narrow window, movement, a shadow slumping against the wall. Adrian's heart slammed. "Ava!" He slammed his shoulder into the door once, twice, until the lock snapped and the frame gave. Inside were 3 people huddled under a thermal tarp. 2 men unconscious and a woman barely upright, her skin pale, lips cracked, hair matted with frost. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice. "Ava." She blinked, unfocused, whispering through chattering teeth. "I told her, find North Star." He fell to his knees, wrapping his coat around her, pulling her close. The brass whistle in his pocket pressed between them, cold against his chest. "I found her," he said, voice breaking. "Ellie's safe. You're safe now." Ava's fingers curled weakly in his sleeve. "Knew you'd come," she whispered. Leah was already on the radio, calling for EMTs. Sirens began to echo faintly through the storm outside. Adrian held his sister tighter, feeling the shallow rise of her breathing. The guilt, the silence, the years. They dissolved into that fragile warmth. Snow flurries swirled through the broken doorway, glittering under the flickering lights. He whispered again, "I've got you, Ava. I've got you." And, for the first time since the blizzard began, the cold didn't win. The ambulance cut through the white storm like a scar of red light. Its siren wailed, echoing down the industrial corridor as rescue crews flooded into the Cold Core compound. Adrian sat in the back, holding Ava's hand. Her fingers were stiff, but alive. Alive. The paramedics had wrapped her in heated blankets, tubes running from IV bags, oxygen mask fogging with every shallow breath. Ellie's face flashed in his mind, the way she had whispered, Mom said to find North Star. That one sentence had rewritten every priority in his life. Ava stirred. "Ellie," she rasped, voice muffled behind the mask. "She's safe," Adrian said quickly, leaning closer. "At my place. Warm. Resting. You saved her, Ava." Her eyes flickered open, glassy but recognizing him. "You came." "Always," he whispered, though they both knew that wasn't true, not always. The paramedic called from the front. "Vitals stabilizing. She's hypothermic but strong." Adrian nodded, exhaling for the first time since the night before. He watched the IV drip, the rhythmic pulse on the monitor, the fragile proof of life. When they reached North Memorial, the ER team swept her away. Adrian followed until the nurse stopped him at the swinging doors. "Family can wait there, sir." He sat in the waiting area again, this time with Leah beside him, her coat crusted with ice. She handed him a paper cup of coffee. "You did it," she said quietly. He shook his head. "We found her. Doing it means holding the people who did this accountable." Leah's expression hardened. "I've already sent everything to the State Labor Board. Photos, temperature logs, internal memos. Cold Core's done. They'll investigate every last safety drill." Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I built an empire on technology that maps warmth across cities, yet my own sister froze under it." "Don't turn this into guilt," she said softly. "Turn it into action." Her words lodged somewhere deep. 2 hours later, a nurse waved him back. Ava was awake, barely, but enough. The room hummed with quiet machines, the steady hiss of oxygen. Her eyes tracked him as he entered. "You look terrible," she whispered, a faint smile flickering. "So do you," he replied, and they both laughed, a cracked, trembling sound that felt like sunlight breaking through frost. He sat at her bedside, holding her hand gently. The years of silence between them began to melt, word by word. "I shouldn't have left things the way I did," he said. "That night at Dad's funeral, I said things I can't take back." Ava's gaze softened. "You were angry. So was I. But anger doesn't keep you warm, does it?" "No," he said. "It doesn't." She turned her head slightly toward the window, where gray light leaked through snow-caked glass. "Ellie," she whispered. "She was brave, wasn't she?" "The bravest kid I've ever met," Adrian said, his voice unsteady. "She kept that whistle with her, the one from Glacier Peak." Ava's lips curved faintly under the oxygen mask. "Told her it was magic. Said if she ever got lost, it would find her way home." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the whistle and set it gently in her hand. "It did," he said. "It brought her to me, and it brought me to you." Tears welled in Ava's eyes, freezing at the corners before they fell. "You came back. I should have never left," he whispered. For a moment, the hospital faded. The machines, the hum, the snow. It was just them, two siblings who had finally found their way through the storm. A knock at the door interrupted them. Leah stepped in quietly, holding her tablet. "Sorry," she said. "The press just picked up the story. North Star's CEO personally rescuing victims from a frozen warehouse. It's everywhere." Ava's brow furrowed under her blanket. "That's not why you did this," Adrian sighed. "No, but the truth needs to spread. People need to know what happened to you and the others." Leah nodded. "If we act fast, we can get ahead of the narrative, expose the network, not just the warehouse." Ava's voice was faint but firm. "Then use it. Don't let them hide behind another name." Adrian looked at his sister, at the woman who'd survived the cold by sheer will. "I won't," he said. That night, while Ava slept, he stood by the window of her hospital room. Outside, the city lights shimmered through falling snow. He pulled out his phone, opened North Star's master console, and began typing a new directive into the AI core. Project Cold Front, Priority 1. He set parameters for outreach, data transparency, worker safety audits. Everything Cold Core had buried. This time, no algorithm would protect greed at the expense of life. He looked down the hall toward the pediatric wing, where Ellie was now being moved to stay near her mother. The storm was finally breaking, but something inside him knew the real work had just begun. He whispered to himself, "Warmth isn't found. It's built." And for the first time in years, Adrian Wolfe knew exactly where to start. By the time dawn broke over Minneapolis, the city looked like a field of glass. The blizzard had passed, leaving everything gleaming and brittle in its wake. From the hospital's top-floor window, Adrian could see the skyline glowing pale gold beneath the first clear light in days. It looked calm, but he knew calm never lasted long, not when the truth was about to surface. He had spent the night reprogramming North Star's main AI from his tablet beside Ava's bed. Every new line of code reflected something he'd learned in the past 48 hours. Not from the boardroom, not from data, but from his sister and a 4-year-old who believed warmth could find people. Ellie stirred in the recliner beside her mother's bed. She'd refused to leave, insisting on holding Ava's hand while she slept. The small fingers that had once gripped a cardboard wall now wrapped around her mother's, steady and safe. When Ava woke, her voice was faint but determined. "She doesn't let go," she said with a soft smile. "That's her way of saying, 'Don't you dare leave again.'" Adrian smiled back. "Good. Someone has to keep me in line." A nurse entered, checked vitals, and nodded approvingly. "She's improving faster than we expected," the nurse said. "We'll keep her a few more days for monitoring." When they were alone again, Ava's eyes drifted to the window. "You're not wearing a suit," she said. He looked down at his fleece and work pants. "Figured I'd blend in with normal people for once." "Doesn't suit you," she teased weakly. Then, more serious, "They'll come for you, you know. The people who run those places, the ones you cut contracts with, you're threatening a lot of money." "I'm not the one they should have feared," he said quietly. "They built their empire on suffering. I'm done being part of it." Her eyes softened. "You're finally your father's son again." The words hit something deep in him. Memories of their father's shop, of small acts of decency that never made headlines but built trust. "He'd tell me warmth starts small," Adrian murmured. "A hand, a meal, a door left open. I turned it into an algorithm." Ava squeezed his hand. "And now you're turning it back." Before he could answer, Ryan stepped into the doorway, his coat dusted with frost. "Sir, sorry, you should see this." He handed Adrian his phone. On screen was a breaking news banner. "North Star CEO announces Cold Front Initiative, direct relief for warehouse workers." The article showed photos from the rescue site, the frostbitten facility, stretchers wheeled into the night, and, without his consent, a shot of him carrying Ava through the blizzard. Social media was exploding. Some called him a hero. Others called it a publicity stunt. But buried in the comments were messages from workers, truckers, and families. "Thank you. Finally someone's listening." Ava saw his expression shift. "You didn't want it to go public, did you?" He shook his head. "I wanted to fix it quietly." "Quiet doesn't change systems," she said. "You taught the world how to see cold. Now show them what warmth looks like." Her words landed heavier than any board directive. He took a breath. "Then we do it right. No PR spin, no staged interviews, just facts, lives, and change." That afternoon, he stood before North Star's executive board. Half of them still wore tuxedos from the gala 2 nights ago. Their smiles were brittle. "Gentlemen," he began, voice calm but iron-edged, "North Star's next quarter isn't about expansion. It's about redemption. Effective immediately, we're cutting ties with any partner under labor investigation. Every data layer we've built, thermal grids, shelter routing, logistics, will now serve out people before profit." One executive scoffed. "Adrian, do you realize what that'll cost? Investors will panic." Adrian met his gaze steadily. "Then let them panic. Because the alternative is looking that little girl in the eye and telling her her mother almost died so our stock wouldn't dip 2 points. The room went silent. When the meeting ended, he walked out without looking back. Outside, the air was sharp but clear. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe. That evening, he returned to the hospital with a small wrapped box. Ava was awake, propped up with Ellie asleep beside her. "What's this?" she asked. He set it in her lap. Inside was a new brass whistle, polished, engraved with 3 sets of initials. AWW plus AV plus E. Always home. Tears welled in Ava's eyes as she traced the letters. "You kept the North Star name," she said softly. He smiled. "Because it finally means something again." Ellie stirred, blinking up at them. "Mommy?" Ava brushed her daughter's hair. "We're okay, baby." The little girl looked at Adrian sleepily. "Are you staying?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, kiddo. I'm not going anywhere." Ellie smiled faintly and fell back asleep, one hand still holding her mother's, the other reaching toward Adrian's. He took it gently. Outside, the last light of day faded behind the city skyline, but inside that room, warmth lingered. Real, human, earned. For the first time, North Star wasn't just a company. It was a promise kept. The next day began quietly, the kind of stillness that comes after chaos. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and coffee, sunlight cutting through the blinds in thin golden lines. Adrian stood by the window, watching steam rise from a distant power vent on the frozen Mississippi. For the first time in years, the cold didn't feel endless. It felt temporary, something that could finally break. Ava was stronger now, sitting up in bed and sipping soup, her color returning. Ellie sat beside her, humming softly as she traced little shapes on her mother's wrist with a marker from the nurse's station. "See?" Ellie said proudly. "It's our house, with snow, but warm inside." Ava smiled. "That's beautiful, honey." Adrian leaned against the windowsill, smiling. "You've got an artist in the family." Ellie looked at him. "Mom says you used to draw too." "Yeah," Adrian said softly. "Back when things were simpler." Ava tilted her head. "Simpler doesn't mean better." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was full of shared ground they thought they'd lost. A knock came at the door. It was Leah, looking uncharacteristically cheerful, her coat slung over one arm. "Bad news," she said, stepping in. "You've officially gone viral." Adrian raised a brow. "Viral?" She handed him her tablet. The screen showed footage of him carrying Ava through the blizzard, Ellie asleep in his arms earlier that night, and a reporter's voiceover. "North Star CEO risks life to save child and expose illegal cold storage network." Ava's hand froze on the soup spoon. "They filmed that?" "Traffic cameras," Leah said. "Public feed. It hit national news this morning. You're trending everywhere. Blizzard CEO." Adrian sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "That's not what this is about." Leah smirked. "It's what the public thinks it's about. And honestly, it's helping. Workers from other cold facilities are coming forward. I've got whistleblower reports flooding in from Wisconsin, Illinois, even Canada. Your little cold front program's already saving lives." Adrian blinked. "It's working?" Leah nodded. "People trust North Star now. Not the company, the idea behind it." He glanced toward Ellie, who was drawing hearts around her little snow house. "Then let's make sure we deserve that trust." That afternoon, he held a small press conference in the hospital's community room. No stage, no polished backdrop, just folding chairs, a microphone, and a row of local journalists huddled in coats. Adrian stood before them, still in his thermal jacket, eyes tired but clear. "I built North Star to track heat signatures," he began, "to help cities predict frost zones, save lives in storms. But somewhere along the way, I forgot warmth isn't just a measurement, it's a responsibility. Flashbulbs flickered. He continued, voice steady. Last week, a cold storage facility our system flagged as offline turned out to be a prison for its workers. My sister was one of them. She's alive today because a little girl believed North Star could help her. Reporters leaned forward, the room utterly silent. So, Adrian said, from this moment forward, North Star is opening all cold weather data to the public. We're funding an independent oversight group, and we're launching a new initiative, Heat Lines, to route emergency resources to anyone in danger of freezing, no matter their status, income, or background. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Wolf, is this personal now? Adrian met her gaze. It always should have been. Afterward, he returned to the hospital room, emotionally spent but lighter somehow. Ava looked at him with quiet pride. You said what mattered, she said. I said what was overdue, he replied. Ellie bounced up on the bed. Mom, look! Uncle Adrian's famous. He smiled faintly. I'd rather be useful. Ava chuckled. That's new. As night fell, Adrian sat between them, the hospital room dim except for the city lights outside. Ellie had drawn one last picture before falling asleep. 3 stick figures, 2 tall, 1 small, standing in snow under a big glowing sun labeled Home. Ava looked at it and whispered, She drew us. She did, Adrian said quietly. And she drew what we needed to find. Ava reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You found me when the world didn't. He looked at her, voice breaking just enough. You trusted me even when I didn't deserve it. The wind outside rattled the window, but inside the small hospital room, warmth held steady, soft, persistent, alive. Later, as he watched mother and daughter sleep side by side, Adrian realized the storm hadn't just ended outside. It had ended in him, too. By the end of the week, the world outside the hospital had changed. Snowplows cleared the roads, the river thawed in streaks of steel gray, and downtown Minneapolis hummed again with life. But inside North Star Labs, the shift was deeper, quieter, something that didn't melt with the weather. Adrian stood in his office, sleeves rolled up, watching new dashboards populate across his screens. Cold Front was no longer just an idea. It was operational. Dozens of city agencies, NGOs, and volunteers were already feeding live data into it. Reports from warehouse workers, street-level cold alerts, missing person trackers. The same AI that once mapped commerce was now mapping compassion. Ryan entered with the 2 steaming mugs of coffee. You're trending for the 4th day straight, he said, half amused. People love a redemption story. Adrian took the cup. It's not about me. Ryan shrugged. Tell that to the internet. He grew serious, lowering his voice. We found more facilities like Cold Core, same signatures, same fake shutdowns. Leah's forwarding everything to the authorities. Adrian nodded slowly. We keep going, every one of them. He set his coffee down, staring at the North Star logo on the screen. The same star he'd built a lifetime ago to represent innovation now stood for something else. He opened the live feed from the hospital. Ava was sitting up, sketching in a notepad while Ellie colored beside her. The sight hit him harder than any boardroom victory ever had. His phone buzzed. Ava. He smiled and answered. You're supposed to be resting. Her voice came light but firm. And you're supposed to visit before Ellie eats the whole cafeteria. He laughed, the sound catching him off guard. On my way. When he arrived, Ellie ran into him the moment he stepped inside the room. Uncle Adrian, look what we made. She held up a folded paper snowflake, uneven but perfect in its intent. Mom said this is our warm star. He crouched to her level. It's beautiful. Looks just like North Star. She beamed. Then you can hang it in your office so you don't forget us. Ava, sitting on the bed, smirked. She's already learned how to guilt trip. He grinned. Must run in the family. As Ellie skipped off to show her creation to a nurse, Adrian pulled up a chair beside Ava. The air between them felt lighter now. No more blame, no more walls. "I watched your press conference," she said. "Dad would have been proud." Adrian nodded slowly. "He taught us to show up when it mattered. I just forgot for a while." "You remembered," Ava said softly. "That's what counts." He studied her face. Paler, thinner, but strong. "When you're discharged, I'd like you both to come stay with me for a bit. My place has too many empty rooms." Ava hesitated. "You sure you can handle a 4-year-old who asks 500 questions a day?" "I run an AI that calculates risk for entire cities," he said, smiling faintly. "I think I can manage one curious niece." Ava's eyes glistened. "She deserves family. Real family." "She has it now," Adrian said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, the soft beep of monitors and distant chatter of nurses filling the space. Then Ava reached into the drawer and handed him a folded photo. "I found this in my coat," she said. It was worn, edges curling, but unmistakable. The two of them as teenagers on Glacier Peak, snowflakes caught in their hair, Ava wearing that very brass whistle. He hadn't seen it in 20 years. He traced the faded image with his thumb. "I kept trying to design the world so nothing would get lost," he said. "Turns out I just needed to look back." Ava smiled. "You finally learned what North Star was really for." Ellie ran back in then, holding 2 cups of cocoa and proudly announcing, "Extra marshmallows." She passed one to her mother, one to Adrian. "Cheers," Ava said softly, lifting hers. "Cheers," Adrian echoed, clinking the cup with hers. As the 3 of them sat together, steam rising from the cups, sunlight pouring in through melting frost on the window, Adrian felt something he hadn't known he'd been missing. Peace that wasn't fragile, but earned. Later that night, after visiting hours ended, he walked down to the lobby. Reporters were still camped outside, waiting for comment. He ignored them, and instead paused beside a janitor mopping near the door. "Rough week, huh?" the man said kindly. Adrian nodded. "Yeah, but a good one." The janitor smiled. "Storms show what survives." The words stuck with him long after he stepped out into the cold. The air was sharp, but the kind that reminded you were alive. He pulled the brass whistle from his pocket, the engraving catching the light. AWW plus AV plus E. Always home. He pressed it between his palms, breathed against the cold metal, and smiled faintly. Somewhere behind him, in a hospital room full of laughter and paper snowflakes, his family slept safely. For once, the map of his life no longer pointed north. It pointed home. The city thawed, but Adrian's world only grew busier. Within 48 hours, Cold Front had become the most talked-about civic project in Minneapolis. Local news called it the human side of AI. His inbox overflowed with messages from mayors, nonprofits, and ordinary citizens offering to help. Yet, with every headline, new pressures mounted. Board members demanded explanations. Investors wanted proof that altruism wouldn't sink the company. And, outside North Star's glass tower, journalists camped in the snow, waiting for the next quote from the man who had walked through a blizzard and come back with his sister. Adrian stood in the boardroom, tie loose, fatigue visible under his eyes. "We're no longer a tech company that happens to save lives," he said evenly. "We're a company that saves lives, period. The tech just helps us do it faster." An older director, pale with tension, leaned forward. "You're risking shareholder trust." "I'm rebuilding human trust," Adrian replied, "the kind that lasts longer than a fiscal quarter." The room fell silent. For once, no one dared challenge him. When the meeting ended, he returned to his office and glanced at the small paper snowflake Ellie had made for him. It hung crooked from a lamp, its folds imperfect but beautiful. He smiled faintly, then clicked open the city feed. Cold Front's rescue vans were already moving. thermal sensors tracking stranded motorists, volunteers delivering heated packs, shelters coordinating in real time. The AI pulsed in the rhythmic gold across the map. Every flare of color meant someone had been found. A knock came at the door. Leah stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cold. "We just confirmed the Department of Labor's raid on Arctic Chain. They found 17 workers alive, trapped the same way Ava was. Your press conference forced their hand." Adrian exhaled slowly, emotion tightening in his throat. "Good. That's good." Leah studied him a moment. "You look exhausted." "I am." He rubbed his eyes, half smiling. "But for once, it's the right kind of tired." "Go home," she said gently. "Be with your family. Let the warmth you built out there reach you too." He hesitated, then shut his laptop. She was right. When he reached the hospital, Ava was packing her things. Ellie was already bouncing in excitement, wearing the North Star blue scarf someone had knitted for her. "Look, Uncle Adrian," she said proudly. "They said Mom can come home today." Ava smiled at him, color back in her face. "Doctor says I'm cleared to rest at home, assuming my big brother won't turn the place into a command center." He laughed softly. "You can have the whole top floor. I'll take the couch." "You? On a couch?" she teased. "That I have to see." As they rode down the elevator, Ellie's mittened hand slipped into his. "Are we going to your house now?" "Yes," he said, smiling. "And it's not just mine anymore." Outside, the cold was sharp but clean, the kind of cold that wakes rather than wounds. He opened the SUV door, helped them in, and glanced once more at the hospital's glass facade. He'd walked into that building carrying guilt. Now he was leaving with family. Hours later, the penthouse no longer looked like the sterile haven of a billionaire. Blankets lay across the couches. The fireplace crackled. Ellie's laughter filled the open rooms as she built a snow fort out of cushions. Ava, wrapped in one of Adrian's oversized sweaters, sat by the window sipping tea. He brought her a plate of soup, smiling as she eyed the modern kitchen. "You really cook now?" "Once in a while," he said. "North Star's cafeteria doesn't serve love in it." She chuckled. "You've changed." He leaned on the counter. "Or maybe I finally caught up to who I was supposed to be." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "You did good, Adrian." He glanced toward Ellie, who was now arranging her paper snowflakes across the fireplace mantel. "She did better," he said softly. The three of them ate together, quiet, ordinary, perfect. Later that evening, when Ava and Ellie had fallen asleep in the guest room, Adrian stood alone on the balcony. The city stretched below him, a tapestry of light and movement. For years, he'd chased control, precision, efficiency, perfection. But life, he was realizing, wasn't meant to be mapped. It was meant to be felt. The whistle hung from his neck now, warm against his chest. He lifted it, thumb brushing the engraving. A plus AV plus E. Always home. He smiled and whispered into the wind, "We're home now, Ava. All of us." The wind carried the sound away, not as a loss, but as a promise kept. And somewhere below, on the streets his AI now protected, a cold front van stopped for a family shivering in the cold. Another life pulled from the frost. Another spark of warmth spreading outward from what started as one broken bond made whole again. 3 days later, Minneapolis felt almost reborn. The wind still bit, but people walked differently, faces lifted, steps lighter. The news kept running clips of the cold front turnaround, hailing it as proof that even technology could have a conscience. But for Adrian, none of it mattered as much as the quiet mornings now filling his penthouse with something he hadn't heard in years. Laughter. Ellie's laughter. She ran through the living room in fuzzy socks, dragging her new sled helmet behind her like a trophy. "Uncle Adrian! Look! Mom says we can go outside." Adrian leaned over the kitchen counter, half a smile tugging at his mouth. "Are you sure? Last time you nearly declared war on a snowbank." Ellie giggled. "That's 'cause the snowbank started it." From the sofa, Ava laughed softly, still wrapped in a blanket but looking stronger each day. Her cheeks had regained color, her hair tied back neatly now. "Go easy on your uncle," she said. "He's not as invincible as his fancy glasses make him look." Adrian lifted a brow. "Excuse me, these are patented resilience frames." Ellie burst out laughing, running to grab her boots. Ava watched, amusement fading into something softer, gratitude. "She hasn't laughed like that in months," she said quietly. Adrian's tone gentled. "She makes this place feel like it's breathing again." Ava nodded, eyes shining. "So do you." He turned toward her. "Ava, don't," she said softly. "Don't apologize again. We already lost enough years to pride. Let's not waste the ones ahead on guilt." He smiled faintly. "Deal." That afternoon, they ventured outside for the first time together. The wind had calmed, sunlight glinting off rooftops like glass. Adrian carried the sled while Ellie bounced ahead, singing a song she'd made up about heroes with warm maps. At Loring Park, snow still blanketed the fields. Families played, dogs bounded through drifts, and the smell of roasted nuts drifted from a nearby vendor. Adrian set the sled down while Ellie clambered in, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Ready?" he asked. She grinned. "Ready." He gave her a gentle push. The sled slid smoothly down the slope, spraying glittering snow as she laughed uncontrollably, the sound echoing through the park. Ava watched from the bench, her scarf pulled close, eyes wet but smiling. "She's free again," she whispered when Adrian sat beside her. "She's brave," he said, "like her mother." Ava looked at him then, something steady in her gaze. "You didn't just rescue us, Adrian. You fixed something in yourself, too." He didn't answer right away. "Maybe," he said, "but I think Ellie did that." Ava smiled. "She has that effect on people." They sat quietly for a moment, watching Ellie tumble into the snow and pop up laughing. Then Ava spoke again. "You know, Mom used to tell us that storms have a reason, that they clear the air for what's next." Adrian followed her gaze across the park. The white hills, the skyline, the children's bright jackets like sparks of color against the snow. Then maybe this one did its job. That night, North Star Labs hosted a quiet internal gathering, not the glitzy kind, but one filled with staff, engineers, and outreach volunteers who'd spent the week turning AI models into real relief. Adrian stood before them, more at ease than anyone had seen him in years. "I used to think leadership was about vision," he said. "But maybe it's really about listening, especially to the people we forget to hear. My sister reminded me of that. My niece reminded me of that. From now on, everything North Star builds will be for them and for everyone who ever felt unseen in the cold." When he stepped down, the applause wasn't loud. It was warm, genuine, human. Leah approached after, clinking a glass of cider against his. "You did it," she said. "Cold fronts spreading to Chicago and Detroit next week. You've started a movement." Adrian chuckled softly. "Let's just call it paying back a debt." Hours later, he returned home to find Ellie fast asleep on the couch, one mitten still on, a crayon drawing sprawled beside her. Ava was in the kitchen folding laundry, humming to herself. Adrian picked up the drawing. It showed 3 stick figures standing under a big shining sun, one tall, one shorter, one tiny, with the words, "My family," written above them in crooked letters. A lump rose in his throat. "She drew us again," he murmured. Ava smiled gently. "She draws what she wants to keep." He looked at her, the brass whistle gleaming faintly at her collarbone. "Then let's give her something to draw forever." For a long moment, the 2 siblings stood there in silence. No blizzard, no noise, just warmth filling the spaces that once held regret. The snow outside began to fall again, soft and slow, but this time it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a promise renewed. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of the penthouse, a soft gold that touched everything. The folded blankets, the cooling mugs of cocoa, the paper snowflakes Ellie had taped unevenly across the glass. For the first time in years, the place felt lived in. Not polished, not perfect, alive. Adrian stood at the stove, flipping pancakes that looked more like abstract art than breakfast. Ellie sat at the counter in a pink sweater 2 sizes too big, swinging her legs while coloring a North Star van on her sketch pad. Ava leaned against the doorway, smiling as she watched them. "Since when do CEOs make pancakes?" she teased. "Since one small person insisted that restaurant pancakes don't have feelings," he said, mock stern. Ellie giggled. "Yours are warmer." Ava smiled, her expression softening. "She's not wrong." Adrian plated the pancakes and sat with them, feeling an unfamiliar quiet joy in the small, ordinary things. The smell of syrup, the light laughter, the way Ava didn't seem to hide her smile anymore. For a man who had built machines to calculate human need, he was finally learning to feel it instead. After breakfast, Ellie disappeared to the living room to build another cardboard shelter fort. She decorated it with stickers and paper stars, proudly calling it Cold Front HQ. Ava sipped tea beside her brother, studying him carefully. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think the worst part of being lost was the cold. But it's not. It's the silence that comes with it." He looked at her. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now it's the warmth that scares me, because it feels real again." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his voice gentler than she'd heard it in years. "That's how you know it's worth keeping." They sat quietly for a moment, the sounds of Ellie humming under the cardboard fort filling the room. Then Adrian's phone buzzed. A message from Leah. He opened it, reading aloud. "Breaking news. Cold Front Initiative to receive citywide partnership. Mayor signs emergency winter outreach bill today." Ava's eyes widened. "Already?" He nodded, barely believing it. "The pilot's expanding faster than we planned. Other cities want in." Ava smiled. "You turned a rescue into a movement." Adrian looked out the window at the skyline blanketed in soft snow. "We turned a storm into purpose." Later that afternoon, the 3 of them visited the Cold Front Community Hub, North Star's newly converted warehouse near the river, transformed into a shelter and logistics center. Rows of volunteers sorted heat packs, gloves, and food kits. The place buzzed with quiet energy, alive with intent. When Adrian and Ava stepped inside, heads turned, but not with awe, with gratitude. "Mr. Wolf," a young volunteer said, shaking his hand, "we started using your AI for street scans last night. Found 4 people trapped under the viaduct before the temperature dropped. It works." Adrian smiled, the words hitting deeper than any corporate report ever had. "Good," he said simply. "That's what it's for." Ellie tugged on his sleeve. "Can I help too?" Ava crouched beside her. "You already did, sweetheart. You started all of this." Ellie frowned thoughtfully. "Then can I keep helping?" Adrian bent down so they were eye level. "Tell you what, how about we make you our honorary North Star navigator?" Her eyes went wide. "Is that a real thing?" "It is now," he said, smiling. He handed her a small laminated badge with her name on it and a snowflake emblem in the corner. Ellie squealed, hugging him tight. "You're the warmest map ever," she said against his chest. Ava laughed softly, tears slipping down her cheeks. Out of the mouths of babes. That evening, as the city lights shimmered across the frozen river, Adrian stood outside the hub with Ava. The cold nipped at their faces, but it didn't bite anymore. Inside, Ellie was helping volunteers pack blankets, her laughter echoing between the walls. "She's going to remember this winter for the rest of her life," Ava said quietly. "Maybe that's the point," Adrian replied, "that not all storms have to end in loss." They stood there for a while, watching breath rise in the silver clouds against the night sky. Ava turned toward him, voice low. "Do you ever think about what Dad would say if he saw us now?" Adrian smiled softly. "He'd probably tell us to fix the leaky pipes before the news cameras show up." Ava laughed, the sound light and easy. "He'd be proud of you, Adrian." He shook his head. No, he'd be proud of us. You survived what no one should have had to, and you still found the courage to trust me again. She slipped her arm through his. We're family. That's what we do. We find each other. They watched as snow began to fall again, soft and steady, blanketing the world in quiet peace. For the first time, Adrian didn't see it as a threat or a challenge to solve. He saw it for what it really was: reminder and renewal, proof that warmth mattered because cold existed. He whispered, half to himself, "Always home." Ava smiled, echoing the words. Always home. And above them, the North Star sign on the building glowed brighter than ever, its light steady against the night, a beacon born not from perfection, but from love rediscovered in the storm. Spring came quietly to Minneapolis that year. The kind of slow thaw where the air smells faintly of metal and damp soil, where snowbanks recede like secrets giving way to truth. The streets were still lined with slush, but the city no longer felt frozen. Warmth had become something people talked about, planned around, built together. For Adrian Wolfe, it was more than weather. It was the measure of everything he'd been trying to fix. He stood in the Loring Park beneath a sky streaked with pale blue, watching Ellie race a small kick sled across the path. Her laughter carried over puddles and half-melted ice. Ava sat nearby on a bench, bundled in a light coat, sunlight in her hair. She looked healthier now, color in her cheeks, strength in her voice, peace in her eyes. Adrian brought over 2 cups of cocoa from a nearby stand. "Extra marshmallows," he said, setting one beside her. She smiled. "You remember." "I'm learning," he said softly. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to Ellie's gleeful shrieks echo through the park. The kick sled tipped once. She laughed harder, then righted it again. "She's fearless," Ava said proudly. "She gets that from you," Ava chuckled. "And the stubbornness from you." "Fair," he admitted. Later that afternoon, the 3 of them walked toward the new Cold Front Operations Center, a former shipping warehouse now transformed into something radiant and human. The walls gleamed with murals painted by local artists, bright hands reaching through snow, a brass whistle glinting like a small sun, the words, "Always home," stenciled in bold above the entrance. Inside, warmth hummed not just from heaters but from people, volunteers sorting thermal blankets, engineers refining mapping software, outreach workers chatting with families. North Star's AI system pulsed gently on the screens, showing live warmth grids expanding through the Midwest. Ellie tugged at Adrian's hand. "Look," she said, pointing to a framed photo on the wall near the entrance, a picture of the 3 of them on opening day. Beneath it, a plaque read, "The North Star Family. Proof that warmth, once found, can be shared." Ava smiled softly. "You've built something that lasts." Adrian shook his head. "We did. Every person here. Every story like yours." She met his gaze, her voice low. "Still, you turned guilt into purpose. Not everyone can do that." He looked toward the bustling volunteers, the screens glowing gold against the concrete walls. "I just followed the map your daughter drew." Ava laughed, eyes glistening. "Then she's the real CEO." "She's got better instincts than most of my board," he said. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, they stood together outside the building. The North Star sign glowed steady blue-white above the door. Adrian slipped his hands into his coat pockets and felt the familiar weight of the brass whistle there. He held it up, its engraving catching the last rays of sunlight. AWW plus AV plus E. Always home. He turned to Ava. "You should have this," but she shook her head. "It's yours now. You earned it back." He looked down at the medal, once a symbol of loss, now one of connection, and nodded. "Then I'll keep it close. A reminder of where everything began." Ellie ran up breathless, holding a snowdrop she'd found poking through the thaw. "Look!" It's the first one. That means winter's really gone, right? Adrian crouched beside her, smiling. That's right. And it means we made it through. She grinned. Then you can't be sad anymore. He shook his head. Not today. She tucked the tiny flower into his palm. Keep it, so you don't forget to be warm. Ava chuckled softly behind them, her voice catching. She's her own little compass, isn't she? She's our North Star, Adrian said, closing his hand around the flower. They started back toward the park, the air mild, snow turning to soft mist around their boots. Behind them, the North Star building glowed against the twilight like a promise, its light steady, unwavering. At the top of the hill, Ellie turned and blew the brass whistle, the clear tone echoing over the river. It wasn't a call for help this time. It was a call home. Ava laughed through her tears. You hear that, big brother? He nodded, voice thick but smiling. Yeah, I hear it. As they walked on, hand in hand, the city lights flickered to life, tiny constellations tracing warmth across the skyline. Adrian glanced up once more at the night sky and whispered, almost to himself, the map's finally complete. And for the first time, it didn't point to a company or a cause, it pointed to family. It pointed to home.